All right, let's talk about one of the most influential and, let's be honest, one of the most intimidating collections of texts in history, the Old Testament. Today, we're going to treat this as your personal user's guide to an incredible ancient library. You've probably been there, right? You decide you're going to read it, you open it up to page 1, and you're immediately hit with these epic stories. Then suddenly you're wading through dense legal codes, then beautiful poetry, then fiery prophecies. It can feel kind of overwhelming. But here's the secret. Understanding its structure is the key to unlocking the whole thing. Okay, let's dive right in. First things first, what is the Old Testament, really? The most important thing to get your head around is that it is not one single book written by one single author. Not even close. It's a collection. So at its core, yes, the Old Testament is the first major part of the Christian Bible, but its roots go so much deeper. Its entire foundation is the Hebrew Bible. You might also hear it called the Tanakh. And this was the collection of sacred writings for the ancient Israelites put together over many, many centuries. And this is probably the single most helpful way to think about it. Don't picture a novel you read from start to finish. Instead, picture a library. It's a curated collection of totally different books by all sorts of authors in different styles from a vast period of time, all brought together in one volume. So if it's a library, what are the different sections on the shelves? How is this thing organized? Well, let's take a little walk down the aisles and see what we can find. In the Christian tradition, this library is usually broken down into 4 main sections. First up is the Pentateuch. These are the famous first 5 books you've definitely heard of, like Genesis and Exodus. Then you've got the historical books, which, you guessed it, tell the epic story of the nation of Israel. After that, you'll find the wisdom literature. This is where you get books like Psalms and Proverbs, full of poetry and deep thoughts. And finally, you have the prophets, delivering some really powerful messages about justice and faithfulness. Now, here's where things get really, really interesting. Because if you pick up 2 different Bibles, you might notice that they don't have the exact same books in their Old Testaments. And this brings us to the really important question of the canon, which is just a fancy word for which books officially made the cut. This is the big puzzle we're trying to solve. What's the deal with the different numbers? Well, the answer is buried deep in the history of how these texts were gathered, translated, and officially approved by different faith traditions over thousands of years. Let's break down the numbers. In most Protestant Bibles, the Old Testament has 39 books. This list was settled during the Reformation back in the 16th century, and it matches the books you find in the original Hebrew Bible. But then you pick up a Catholic Old Testament, and you'll count 46 books. It includes 7 books, plus some extra parts to others that you won't find in the Protestant version. And then we have the Eastern Orthodox Old Testaments, which have the largest collection of all, usually around 49 books, and sometimes even more, depending on the specific tradition. So you see, the number of books you get really depends on which library you're visiting. This table really makes it clear. You can see there's a lot of overlap. Everyone agrees on core books like Genesis and Isaiah, for sure, but then look at books like Tobit and Judith. They're accepted by Catholic and Orthodox traditions, but they're excluded by Protestants. This is really where the paths begin to split. And what's fascinating is that even the words people use for these books reveal these different viewpoints. Catholic and Orthodox traditions call them deuterocanonical, which means second canon. They're seen as inspired scripture. Protestants, on the other hand, call them the Apocrypha, which means hidden things. For them, these books are valuable for wisdom and insight, but not for building core beliefs. So the name isn't just a label, it signals a whole theological stance. So how did we get here? How did this amazing library even get built? Well, it wasn't an overnight job, that's for sure. It's a story of writing, editing, translating, and debating that unfolded over more than 1,000 years. You really have to remember, this collection wasn't written all at once. The earliest texts might go back to the first millennium BC, and the process of collecting them continued for hundreds and hundreds of years. It was a gradual living process of a people recording their story, their laws, and their relationship with God. This timeline kind of gives you the highlight reel. The first 5 books got finalized way back in the Persian period. Then, a huge moment, the Septuagint. This was a Greek translation of the Hebrew texts, and this is the key part, it included those extra books. This Greek version became the standard for early Christians. Centuries later, Jerome's famous Latin Vulgate translation acknowledged the difference between the Greek version and the original Hebrew. All of this history comes to a head in the 16th century, when Protestant reformers decided to go back to that original Hebrew list, which is how they landed on the 39-book version. And that whole long journey we just saw really captures the modern scholarly view perfectly. I love this quote from Professor Timothy H. Lim, who calls it a collection of authoritative texts that went through a human process of writing and editing. It helps us appreciate that there's both deep faith and a really complex human history behind this library. So after all this history, why does this ancient collection still have such a massive impact on the world today? It's because underneath all that complexity, there are these powerful, universal themes that have been speaking to people for thousands of years. So why has this library lasted? Because across all its different books, these deep themes just keep showing up. There's the idea of the covenant, this search for a special relationship with the divine. You've got these incredible stories of salvation and redemption, of finding hope in the darkest of times. There are stark warnings about divine judgment and the consequences of our actions. But what might be the most revolutionary is this constant call for social justice, a demand to protect the poor and the vulnerable. And it's not afraid to ask the hardest questions, wrestling with the problem of evil. These aren't just ancient ideas. They are the big questions about fairness, hope, and meaning that we are still dealing with right now. That's why it still matters. So I guess that leaves us with one final question to think about. Knowing that the Old Testament isn't just a single book, but a library put together by human hands over 1,000 years, how does that change the way we read it, the way we interpret it, and the way we understand its place in our world today?